You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state?
We wouldn't allow some of these fake news leftist outlets in.
We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House. The Trump White House will speak to all media outlets and personalities, not just the legacy media who are seated in this room.
It's sad and frankly pathetic that Democrats and liberals in the legacy media continue to allow their hatred for the president to override their love for our country.
Karoline Leavitt symbolized a shift, bringing YouTubers and podcasters closer to political spaces like never before.
We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House.
But was it freedom? Or just a smarter way to control what you believe? For decades, legacy media controlled what counted as truth. When trust collapsed, people turned to alternative voices, hoping for real freedom of information. Today, whether it's a news anchor or a YouTuber, you're still hearing stories shaped by power, just in different packaging. This isn't about choosing between old media or new media. It's about asking the right question. Who decides what you hear and why? Let's find out. For most of modern history, information wasn't free. It was controlled, carefully packaged by a handful of powerful media corporations. In America, names like CNN, NBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post didn't just report the news, they defined what was news. For decades, this system was accepted, even trusted. After all, these were the institutions that informed citizens, held governments accountable, and exposed corruption, or so it seemed. But over time, cracks began to show. We saw it in the early 2000s, when major networks unquestioningly amplified false narratives about weapons of mass destruction, leading to a war in Iraq that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. By the 2010s, trust in mainstream media had plummeted. A 2016 Gallup poll showed that only 32% of Americans still had confidence in mass media, a historic low. People began to realize that the so-called Fourth Estate was no longer an impartial observer. It had become an active player, with its own stakes in politics, economics, and culture. And then came Donald Trump. While many politicians feared the media, Trump embraced the fight. He called them out loudly and relentlessly, branding CNN and others as fake news. But here's the important part. Yet criticizing the media wasn't enough. If you wanted to escape its grip, you couldn't just complain. You had to replace it, and that's exactly where the story shifts. From legacy control to a new strategy led by an unlikely figure. A young press secretary named Karoline Leavitt. The Trump administration didn't invent distrust in the media, it simply recognized a truth. In a world where traditional gatekeepers lose credibility, the smartest move isn't to silence them, it's to make them irrelevant. That's exactly what happened. Why bother fighting for fair coverage from CNN or NBC? When platforms like YouTube, Twitter Spaces, and podcasts were commanding audiences that outnumbered primetime TV, the shift wasn't about personalities like Karoline Leavitt. It was a natural evolution of political communication in the digital age. For decades, legacy media held a monopoly on access. They decided which questions were asked and which narratives dominated headlines and which stories quietly disappeared. By opening White House briefings and communications to independent creators, the administration wasn't just promoting transparency. It was curating a new ecosystem where narratives flowed through more sympathetic, or at least more fragmented, channels. Take the example of the MS-13 deportation case, where mainstream outlets framed the story as a humanitarian tragedy. Alternative media platforms reframed it, presenting court records and facts ignored by traditional journalists. This wasn't accidental. It was a demonstration of how control over narrative could shift hands, from polished newsrooms to decentralized digital voices. The rise of podcasters, YouTubers, and independent journalists in political spaces wasn't just a grassroots movement. It became a tool, a way for governments to shape discourse without facing the hostile filters of traditional press. The emergence of alternative media promised something powerful: freedom of information, diverse perspectives, and unfiltered truth. Creators outside the traditional system began asking difficult questions, ones mainstream journalists often avoided. Complex political issues, once reduced to shallow sound bites, were now being discussed in long-form podcasts and independent videos. For many people, this felt refreshing. It was authentic, raw, and most importantly, free from the polished narratives of corporate newsrooms. Governments, particularly those like the Trump administration, saw an opportunity. For supporters of this shift, it was proof that the monopoly on truth had finally been broken. But revolutions are rarely one-sided victories. Beneath the surface of this new media landscape lies a more complicated and far more dangerous reality. When political power embraces alternative media, it's rarely just about transparency. It's about understanding that the battlefield has shifted. While independent creators appear free, someone still decides which voices are amplified. Who gets the exclusive interviews? Who is invited into political spaces like the White House briefing room? Unlike traditional journalism, which, despite its flaws, operates under editorial standards and accountability, independent creators are driven by algorithms, audience engagement, and subscriber loyalty. Their survival depends on keeping viewers entertained and reaffirming their audience's beliefs. And while legacy media was criticized for centralized control, this fragmented, decentralized world brings a different danger: information overload. When every voice is competing for attention, the truth doesn't always win. Instead, the most engaging, emotional, or sensational story rises to the top, regardless of accuracy. So what we're witnessing isn't pure media freedom. It's a redistribution of influence. Today, that control is no longer centralized in a newsroom. It's dispersed across podcasts, YouTube channels, social media feeds. So, as legacy media fades and alternative media rises, don't be too quick to celebrate the dawn of a free information age. Because whether it's CNN or your favorite podcaster, you're still hearing a story crafted, framed, and delivered for a reason. Truth has never been about access. It has always been about control. The only real defense in this landscape isn't choosing between old media and new media. It's choosing to think beyond both. Ask yourself, not once, but every time you consume information, why am I being told this? Who benefits if I believe it? Whether it's legacy media or new media, always ask, who's telling the story and why? If you found value in this analysis, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more content that challenges the obvious.